Hello and welcome to episode 12 of the Natalie inRenaissance podcast. So, we've been talking a lot about learning and psychological support, and also the thoughts that we have as learners and people who are alive on this earth. And so, one of the things that I have been thinking about is that teaching and learning is really all about perspective. And I think perspective can be looked at as an approach or a different way of thinking about something. And when it comes to creative work, or also something where you want to cultivate independent thinking amongst your clients or also your students, knowing how to build and gain various perspectives is really going to help you as a teacher, but also them as a learner. And I find myself as a teacher, really all my job is to supply multiple different approaches and perspectives to any one given thing. I have found that all approaches can be good, but there are also various approaches and various stages of learning that may require something a little bit different each and every new level, as you could say. And let's say that you've been doing something, maybe it's your normal way of approaching it, and then you get stuck and you're not really sure why you've gotten stuck, because this approach has worked for you so far and now you've just gotten stuck and you're just racking your brain. This should work and you're not really sure why it's not working. And at this point, a various perspective of thinking about it differently will help us to overcome this cognitive block in the mind and to perhaps use a different way of approaching it neurologically to help us to integrate, to help us to coordinate whatever the problem is at that moment. And especially as a piano teacher with some of my adult students, we have so many instances where they've gotten stuck and they don't feel like they've progressed. But then in coming to lesson, I know that my job in that moment is to help them to perhaps locate a different approach or to offer them a different perspective than how they've currently been thinking about it in the past. And 9 times out of 10, they say, wow, I haven't thought about it that way. And then it just helps them to get past this cognitive roadblock, no matter what it could be. And it moves them to a different path, and then they're able to keep the progress going. And of course, we know that learning is never linear, progress is never linear, skill acquisition is never linear, and inevitably, no matter what approach we use, there will be a block, inevitably. And even in my experience of both learning and teaching, I find that sometimes all that's necessary is one new word, one new thought, one new metaphor, even something completely different, and we can use that as a powerful pivot point to a new path. It could be new neural pathways. It could be a new way of processing that the mind just is more ready to accept. And so by using these different perspectives, it really helps to integrate various things that haven't been integrated before. And it also can help one from getting stuck, because like I said, using only one resource, using only one approach, inevitably, because learning is complex and also our minds are complex, the way we process can be complex, having a repertoire of various perspectives, I think helps both teachers and learners, because there's nothing like having a client or having a student who is struggling with something and we can't identify with their pain point, and therefore we can't really solve anything. I think of so many people who are wonderful performers, but they've really been lucky, quote unquote, because they've never really struggled in learning something. And I find that the people who struggle the least often are not very productive teachers, because they don't really know what to say to their customers, to their clients, because they've never experienced that before, and they really haven't had to build up a repertoire of various approaches to help guide people through those pain points, because somehow they're just unfamiliar with those things. Someone once said to me, Miss Natalie, how do you know all these things? And I just had to be honest and said, I have struggled so much, both in learning, in approaching new things, in coordinating. I have struggled a lot, but I've been able to recognize that struggle going through all these things, learning complicated pieces, analyzing information, learning about teaching and doing it, all the struggle has really helped me to be able to acquire more and more perspectives and to really build out my closet mentally to help other people as they navigate through similar pain points. And so if you find yourself to be one of those people who has really found an approach that works with certain clients, you're really committed to it, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I just think that you do have to be cognizant that that certain approach will not help everyone who you may visit, everyone who you may encounter. And so just having resources outside of that zone, that space that you have claimed for yourself, so to speak, at least knowing that those things exist and that you have access to them is very important. Because I think if you don't acknowledge that, you will inevitably have something that just does not work. You could have the best program, the best resources, but at some point it will not work for someone. And that's totally okay. None of us are cookie cutter, which I think is the beautiful thing about being alive. So I think it's important to just recognize that. So let's get back to the idea of perspective. And perspective is sort of the habitual way that you have of approaching something, of viewing the world, of doing what you do, your daily habits. Is basically your autopilot, what you do unconsciously or even consciously, but you do it a lot. And in learning, of course, if it works for you, that's great. But I want to gear this episode in discussing how do we gain more perspective, because if we know that one approach will not work forever, instead of getting to that point and then freaking out that we're not doing something well, something isn't working, and therefore we are a bad teacher or a bad learner, we just need to, from the get-go, just understand that the road that which we're taking may not work forever. And so to gain different perspectives, of course, there are listening to podcasts as you are currently doing, and just hearing someone talk about a new subject, talking about a similar domain is very important, because often the thoughts that they share could be very different than thoughts that you currently hold. And even if you disagree, I think hearing someone else's point of view and just hearing that to think the same way that they do is important, because it's sort of experiencing a new neural pathway in the brain. It's a thought that you haven't had before, and so it's being a learner. The brain goes into more of being a learner. Of course, there's reading books, as I love to do, meeting other people and discussing with them, conferences and such. Hearing other people share their expertise or information is really important. But I would say one of the most important things to build new perspectives is actually to experience things in new ways. And so some of the things that have been really helpful for me as a teacher in gaining perspectives and various perspectives on what I currently do, most of them actually have nothing to do with my domain exactly. And one of the best books I ever read about music teaching was actually a book about teaching basic ballet. And I know that sounds crazy, but I think sometimes when you're too enmeshed in what you're doing, it's really easy to get sucked into the details and to lose our overall holistic view of how what we do connects to life and sort of miss the big picture application. The ballet book talked a lot in language that had nothing to do with music. It talked a lot about timing and breathing and feeling the music and the relationship between the breath and the phrase and the gesture. And it really helped a lot of things click for me mentally, again, by taking that outsider's perspective and transferring it to what I know in my domain. Everything became a lot more relevant and a lot more interesting for me. And that approach and that perspective I have used a lot. So definitely being an avid reader of all sorts of different domains, and then using transfer, where we take valuable gems of information from one domain and we sort of extract those and apply them to similar things in another domain, is really a great thing to not get stuck, especially when it comes in the jargon of one's domain and also in habitual approaches of that domain. I was just reading about the Dyson's inventions and how they started by creating vacuums, which the first one took 5 years and apparently 5,127 prototypes. But I think, at least for me and people of a similar age and background, we're very familiar with the Dyson Airwrap now. And it's so interesting to see how this person, this inventor, took a powerful pivot moment and moved from being in the cleaning home space with a vacuum and to industrial, I think, at some point, and then moved into the beauty space to a whole new audience and clientele. And I think that's all we're hearing about now in this time. And it's just so interesting to see how a quote unquote outsider can do so much innovation and just create such a powerful moment in a whole new domain. And I just think that just goes to show the level of creativity, innovation, but also of learning and transferring and being adaptable in that way. Just shows how powerful the idea of perspective and of pivoting is. So, to think about things differently, we can hear or read about other people thinking about things differently, which might inspire us to do the same. It then could also be being in new spaces that help us to do so. And there's a great book by Dr. Joe Dispenza. I've mentioned the book before, but the book is called How to Break the Habit of Being Yourself. And I've mentioned this before, but it's all about how the neural pathways that we do have, they are connected to spaces that we inhabit. And so let's say that at home, there's certain neural pathways that you think very often when you're at home in the space, but it's not the same as the thoughts that you have when you're at the gym or when you're at your workplace. And so if you find yourselves in thought patterns that you aren't really happy with, you need to change the physical spaces in which you inhabit because they will inspire different thought patterns. And I love to move around my living arrangements in my spaces, in my studio, at home, just because by doing that physically and having that physical manifestation of moving around, of changing, I am encouraging new neural pathways to happen, which it might sound crazy, but reading the book, it was such an eye-opener. And of course, I love travel. And so every time I travel, I am inhabiting these completely new places where I have no history the majority of the time. And being in those new spaces, it's very uplifting. It's very creative time for me because the thoughts that I have when I am traveling, there's nothing like them. And so it's not only the beauty of being in a new place, of meeting new people, but just mentally, it's a very fresh and pure place for me to be because I'm not really surrounded by anything that I'm familiar with. And that helps me to have new thoughts and to be more creative. And so even by visiting new places, being exposed to new stimuli, being exposed to new ideas, art, food, whatever it may be, it will spark new ideas in the mind. And the last one that I was thinking of sharing is also just experiencing new things. I took a dance class, as I mentioned a while ago. I took a dance class on the Viennese waltz, and it was something I never done before. And I could feel my mind working so hard to be able to physically put everything together and be very smooth and pay attention to the timing, also my form and also my dance partner. And I could feel my mind working and thinking new thought patterns. And I was actually really proud of myself for being in that uncomfortable place because it was uncomfortable at the beginning in the sense that I was the complete beginner. I don't have that much of a dance background or experience. And so by putting myself in that position, and of course everyone else was so welcoming and so comfortable, but I could feel myself growing as a person as I kept going weekly to these classes, trying things on the right side, on the left side, clockwise, counterclockwise, and receiving instruction in a completely different domain. That has really helped me in my current domain of being an artist educator, being a piano teacher, in that some things that you think are very similar and it should just be a repeat or transferring because it's in different hands, because it's in a different place, it feels completely different. So I understand those pain points a lot better than before when I hadn't had that experience. And so, in seeking out new experiences in your domain, outside of your domain, I have the opinion that outside of the domain experiences are always better, but that's just my opinion. It's also my personality because I'm a very curious person, and indirect approaches I know somehow work better for me than direct approaches. And so I think the key here, no matter what it is, whether it's a new book, whether it's being in a new space, meeting a new person, I think these things make all the difference. And it also helps me to engage more with life because I remember when I was in school and I would be in the middle of a 5-hour practice session and I would sit on the bench and look out the window and just wondering what else was happening out there in life. And I just remember sitting there thinking, I can't wait until I'm finished with this degree and I can actually go out and live and experience life and then bring that back into my music, bring that back into my teaching. And now I recognize that I'm in that space that I wanted to be at, the space to explore, the space to be curious. I mean, I've always been that way, but I think the season of life I'm in, it really does support that in meeting new people, in just being a curious sponge, as my teacher once called me. But it really helps in building out, again, the approaches that are going to help the pain points that our clients or customers may come across. And I think the longer time they spend with you, you're just going to help them uncover more about themselves, uncover more about their process, their styles. And as you help them to grow, there are different stages of growing and there's different seasons and these difficulties or complexities that come with these different stages. And the more in tune you are with your own uncomfort, the more in tune you are with how it feels to grow, to adapt, to be flexible, to transfer, to pivot, the more you are going to help them and the more you are going to bring more to the artistic space, to the teaching space, to the learning space, because you are embodying all of those characteristics that you want to see in your clients, in your customers. And so I think that's the most important part of teaching and learning is that anyone can find this content anywhere. They can find these services anywhere, but I think it's inspiring others to want to do that, inspiring them by being an example. That's the calling of teaching. I hope this discussion of perspectives has helped you. I know that in my own life, there is so much that I could say this is a waste of my time because it doesn't pertain to XYZ or it isn't moving this XYZ needle. But really, as I look back at not only my professional domain, but also all the interests that I have as a person, it has so helped me and everything has been of such value. And there are things that I'm still seeing growth and I see how things transfer and I see the bigger picture and where things are leading me in my own path. And so I thought that this discussion might help you, especially if you have many loves like I do in life, where being confined to one domain or one box is really unthinkable, especially for a lifetime. Follow on Instagram if you're not already at Natalie inRenaissance. Please like and leave a written review. We'll see you in the next episode.